Thank you so much for having me. And it's my luck that Einat is in a taxi because I think initially I was supposed to be the first person. So I'm happy to be on the call and to be speaking to all of you. I will give you like a very brief update of what it's been like on the ground here. Just so that you can hear, just for your information, I didn't even know for sure that I would end up making this call because I just literally a few minutes ago walked in the door from Gaza. I was, as a journalist in Gaza today with the IDF. We were witnessing, and I'm giving you guys the inside scoop because this hasn't even been published yet. As I mentioned, I just got back. But we were with the IDF while they were securing the humanitarian corridor for Palestinian civilians in northern Gaza. So we saw hundreds of Palestinians just in the limited amount of time that we were there, passing through, and all around them, the IDF. It was the IDF actually guarding Palestinians, and it's just so drastically different from the story that we see, especially on social media surrounding this war, but also media. And we know that over the weeks, whereas a lot of people initially felt sympathy and that the media was somewhat sympathetic to Israel, that has started to shift. And that's a pattern. That's something that we see all the time when it comes to Israel defending itself. People are very quick to support Israel when something bad has happened to Israel or when Jewish people have already been killed. But when it comes to preventing more Jewish people being killed, they're much more critical, as we know. So a lot of my work has focused on, well, always, but during this war in particular, has focused on two things. The first of which is sort of my area of expertise, I guess, which is building bridges with the Iranian community. I've worked with a lot of the Iranian communities over the past couple of years, but primarily the last year through their uprisings against the Iranian regime. The vast majority of Iranians, both inside and outside of Iran, are very much against the regime, which, as we know, is funding Hamas to the tune of $100 million a year and Hezbollah even more. Not to mention the other terror organizations on Israel's borders. So these issues are unfortunately very connected. So I've been working with them to help connect them to Jewish communities, to put together, protests, rallies of support for Israel in multiple different countries. And I have to say that the outpouring of support from the Iranian people has been absolutely overwhelming. It's been one of the biggest positives, I think, of this whole operation, positive surprises. However, at the same time, my other work has been focused on combating anti-Semitism and disinformation that we're seeing, especially on social media. Now, I want to qualify what I'm saying by pointing out that it may feel, I don't know how many of you are active on different social media platforms, but it may feel like when you're on it, you're just in a sea of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, and that everybody hates us. And while it's definitely true that anti-Semitism is rising and that anti-Semitism is a very real security issue, or unfortunately around the world, it's not true that everyone hates us. If you actually look at the polling, first of all, most of the world leaders, if not all, including Arab states, by the way, behind the scenes, they're in favor of what the IDF is doing. They're in favor of removing Hamas, and they understand the situation that Israel is dealing with. Unfortunately, we also see some pushback and some organized disinformation from channels that are state-run, like RT, also like Qatar's Al Jazeera, of course, to be expected in this scenario. And that has been very damaging, especially in the Arab world, because they're intentionally presenting a false picture of what's happening on the ground in Israel and what Israel's objectives are. I can't tell you how many times I've answered people saying, well, why is Israel indiscriminately bombing, or why is Israel indiscriminately targeting civilians? Israel has never targeted civilians. Israel is not indiscriminately bombing. And the fact that people are asking these questions is just a response to the anti-Israel propaganda. And we know this because if you look at the actual statistics from wars, from other countries, from other Western countries, including the United States, the combatant to civilian ratio is much, much worse than what Israel is doing now, even. And what Israel has done in the past. Israel is actually one of the most precise armies in the world. Unfortunately, war is war. And we're also dealing with an enemy that is intentionally endangering Palestinian civilians, which I saw with my own eyes today. These are people who on this same road where I stood today were shot at by Hamas for the pure reason that they were following the IDF's instructions to get to safety. So we're talking about a really, really sad situation for everyone involved. I know we don't yet know how many of the casualties were civilian or how many of them are combatants, because Hamas's Ministry of Health is the person putting out the numbers. But there is a lot of destruction. And in that regard, I think it's important that we acknowledge that this is a very sad situation. But at the same time, we can't let that change our approach to this issue and to Israel's right and obligation to defend itself, and to defend itself in a way that gets rid of Hamas for good, because we've been dealing with this pretty much since Israel withdrew from Gaza. So really the only opportunity we have for a better future with our Palestinian neighbors in Gaza is to get rid of Hamas. And speaking with even the soldiers who are on the ground there today about their interactions with Palestinians, I mean, obviously it's a complex situation, but they all pretty much agreed, like, Palestinians know what's happening. They understand what Hamas is doing to them. They're trying to get to safety. They're trying to get away from it. And unfortunately, while there are some Palestinians, many Palestinians even, who supported Hamas activities, there are also tens of thousands who don't. So the IDF is really doing the best that they can in order to protect innocent lives, both on the Israeli side and, if possible, the Palestinian side. But again, we shouldn't be apologizing for defending ourselves. And this is something I think that every Jewish person and every ally of Israel, whether Jewish or not, should feel comfortable saying. There's nothing wrong with Israel defending itself. Israel is taking every precaution possible in order to reduce civilian casualties, and Hamas is doing every possible step to do the opposite. And even though people may dismiss this and say, oh, it's propaganda, it's not, okay? It's not, it's the truth. Whether they believe it or not, this is what's happening on the ground, and we need to keep talking about it until people understand. And maybe that means sharing content from the IDF, sharing some of the raw footage that's come out, sharing some of my footage that I haven't released yet. But we do need to keep this on the agenda, especially on social media, and not let the lies go unanswered. Now, don't be unrealistic. At the same time, we're not going to get rid of every misinformation or disinformation or even anti-Semitism on social media. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't show up and present the information and show that there is another side to this argument. Our voices are very badly needed on social media because it's giving a false perspective, especially to younger generations, that Israel is this hated pariah that's committing horrific war crimes. And that's not the case. It's simply not the case. And furthermore, as someone who myself is a human rights activist for other issues that aren't related to Israel, it's incredibly infuriating, the disproportionate criticism and focus on the state of Israel and on this issue with Gaza, because it does take away from other pressing human rights issues around the world that I think people need to continue to talk about. So I'm going to leave it very, very brief like this. I don't know if we're doing questions, or if anyone has a specific question, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to let one of my own role models, Einat, will take the stage from here.
I don't think Einat is has joined us yet, so we will have time for a couple questions. For instance, what is it that you could recommend to us to do from a social media aspect?
Well, there's a few different things. It depends on what your level of comfort is, obviously, with social media. If you're someone who likes to write or who likes to create their own content or to take really interesting photos, or perhaps you're a graphic designer, great, go for it. Go to town, create as much as you can, present all the information you know about Israel. But if you don't, that's also okay. The best way for you to engage is even, I know it sounds silly and simplistic, but even liking comments. Because if you see that one or two of the comments on a post that is perhaps very biased against Israel, like let's say it's the New York Times' account and they tweet something that's inaccurate, you responding or even you liking people's responses, calling them out, actually makes a difference, because everything on social media is quantitative, not qualitative, unfortunately for all of humanity. But that's the way the world works. So when you do something as small as liking it, that counts as an action. And that's how the algorithm perceives it. And that is the case for pretty much all of the social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, even LinkedIn, Facebook. The more liked a comment is, the more that comment will be displayed. And so especially when you see an account or a page that is inaccurate or that is wrong or that is anti-Semitic, you calling that out in a comment means that every time someone shares that, that comment will be at the top. That should be the goal for our interaction. Now, at the same time, does that mean you should engage with everything on social media? No, you have to use your best judgment. And usually I recommend that people respond and interact with content from people that they know, because that's important. And also I recommend taking things offline if at all possible. Recommend a call or a cup of coffee or whatever. It's usually much easier to speak to someone about these complex issues in person, especially if you have a pre-existing relationship. But if you don't, I also think it's really important for people to interact on larger accounts, be they influencers or news sources across all social media platforms, but especially Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, to interact with these accounts when there is inaccurate information or when they're sharing a report that is completely out of context about what's happening in Gaza, or they mention something about the Palestinian casualties in Gaza, but fail to mention the fact that Israel has gone above and beyond to actually protect thousands of Palestinians. And not only that, but Hamas is doing the opposite. Those are things worth responding to, because there are a lot of eyeballs on those pages and on that content that aren't already convinced one way or the other. And that's your audience. It's almost never who you're actually speaking to on social media or who you're actually responding to. It's the other people who might see that content. And if I'm a person who doesn't care about this issue, and all I ever see on social media is Israel's a baby killer, Israel apartheid, Israel war crimes, and I never ever see, even in the comments, that people are responding and saying, hey, wait a second, that's not right. Look at this information. Look at this example. Then I'm going to walk away, whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from now, with that sentiment being in the back of my head. Oh, yeah, Israel. Oh, yeah, they're committing war crimes. Oh, they're killing kids. That can't happen. All of these little things that we see, whether or not we actually spend time reading what's written, impact how we form our opinions about what's happening in Israel. And so for that reason, it is really important to respond. It doesn't need to be like a long, complex, detailed explanation, because frankly, social media isn't really the best place to have like deep, fact-based dialogue, as I'm sure you know. But it still needs to be addressed. We still need to engage, because if we don't show up to the fight, the entire starting point of the conversation ends up being so far outside of what the majority and the consensus of the Jewish community wants and is okay with, that it doesn't even reflect reality anymore. So we have to keep pushing back, especially because the younger generations are more than ever using social media, and especially with platforms like TikTok, it's becoming a very, very scary place. I don't know if you saw the news, the headlines today about the Osama bin Laden letter, which has for some reason turned into a big trend on TikTok. It's unbelievable how people don't understand the threat and the problem of terrorism right now. And it not just as it pertains to Hamas, but in general. I mean, the fact that Osama bin Laden is trending and you have a bunch of teenagers speaking about that, it's really disturbing. But it also speaks to the fact that we need to push back even more. This is not the time to give up or throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, social media is gone. No, it's not. We might not win the war when it comes to social media because we are outnumbered, but we have to keep fighting or we're guaranteed to lose and we will get pushed back even further, if that makes any sense. I know that's not like the most optimistic thing, but it is important. It's really important, and your voices are needed on that front.
Emily, we have one more question, but I just want to reiterate what you said and use your example of the New York Times. So if you see something that's incorrect by the New York Times, don't by mistake like that piece of social media. Either comment on it or like a comment that corrects it. Otherwise, you'll get into the wrong algorithm. The last question is, do Gazans have access to social media outside of what Hamas posts?
Yes, of course. Of course. In fact, I think for the first time in this conflict, we've started to see a lot of Palestinian social media pop up with criticism, with videos and posts criticizing Hamas. Listen, obviously, we know that there are a lot of Hamas supporters in Gaza, but there are more people speaking out than ever, by the way, also in the West Bank, against Hamas because they're fed up. How could they not be? Their homes are being destroyed. Their entire lives are being uprooted again, war after war after war, and it's all because of Hamas. And not only that, but they know, I saw these people. They're looking at the IDF as someone who's protecting them. Meanwhile, they're on the same road where a few days ago, I guess it was a few weeks ago now, Hamas shot at them. They shot at their own people for trying to get to safety. They literally want Palestinians to die. And as hateful or as anti-Semitic as they may be, as their upbringing may be, they don't want to die either. So they're starting to understand, or there seems to be some sort of understanding that's growing amongst the Gazan community in opposition to Hamas. They're starting to understand the level of exploitation that Hamas has used against them. I mean, millions of dollars have gone through the Gaza Strip, gone into the Gaza Strip, both from Qatar and also from Iran. And none of that has gone to the people. None of that has gone to rebuilding Gaza, to helping people. They have 47% unemployment. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. The level of humanitarian crisis is obscene. And the truth is that while the Free Palestine crowd in the Western world wants to have protests blaming Israel for all of this, it's truly nobody's fault but Hamas. And even Palestinians in Gaza know that. And some of them hate Israel more than they care about their own well-being. That is a phenomenon that we know exists. But a lot of them are realizing that that doesn't make any sense and is completely illogical. And I think that we need to amplify those voices if and when they come up, and continue to educate, until people are blue in the face about what's actually happening on the ground in Gaza, both in terms of Hamas harming their own people, the way that this terror organization operates, and also in terms of the values of the IDF and the efforts that we are taking in order to protect civilian lives, despite being in this crazy, horrible, and heartbreaking situation that our soldiers are in right now.
Well, Emily, thank you so much. It's been very informative. We hope we can call on you again in the future. And thank you for what you do for JNF.
Thank you.